After the spread of sin and seeing how it led to one brother murdering another, the story continues to unfold by introducing us to one of the most well-known characters in the Bible, Noah. Now, most people in our culture, even if they haven't set foot inside a church, are familiar with the basic storyline of Noah. For them, that would include an ark, pairs of animals, a colossal flood, and so forth. While these are certainly elements that come up in the story, what if there is more to it than that? What else can we learn about this event? What is God communicating about Himself through this time in history? And what do we learn about ourselves through this? What does Noah have to do with Jesus? Sin spread wide and sin spread deep. By the time we get to Genesis 6, we may be wondering what God thinks about the situation and what He will do about it. Every thought was nothing but evil, we read. Imagine that kind of world, a place where in every thought and deed, people were in essence shouting at God, "I don't trust you. I don't believe you. I defy you." Such is the essence of sin, a faithless defiance of God, the Creator. God's reaction was one of sorrow and grief. Consider the weight of the statement in verse 6. The Lord was grieved. He felt anguish in His heart. That word grieved in Hebrew means toil, languish, agony, and to be injured in feeling. God could have destroyed the world and all its inhabitants, but instead He chose to purge creation of its great wickedness. Yet He would save one family. He chose not to give up on all humanity, not to turn His back and start over completely. Even though He knew Noah and his descendants would again disappoint Him, defy Him, and walk in faithlessness, God decided to preserve this remnant. Why? Because like a father who will not stop loving his children no matter how often they disobey, God bound His heart to His people. We've seen that God was grieved by the sin of the world, and in His holy judgment, He decided to wipe everything off the face of the earth and start again. But here is where the story takes a turn. God demonstrated His commitment to humanity by choosing to preserve a righteous man's family. Take a look at verse 8 and then verse 18. Noah alone found favor in God's eyes, right? But then notice how it says that God would establish His covenant not with Noah alone, but also with those who belong to Him. Watch the progression. Noah received God's favor, was declared righteous, and then his family benefited from his righteousness. The same truth is reiterated in Genesis 7:1. Then the Lord said to Noah, "Enter the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you alone are righteous before me in this generation." Noah found favor. Noah was the only righteous one, yet Noah's family was saved. The story of Noah and the ark shouts to all those who persist in living apart from God about what is to come. It invites all to accept God's offer of protection and safety found only by being united to Christ. There are two truths here we must not miss. First, grace comes before righteousness. It's no accident that the text specifies Noah receiving favor from the Lord before being declared righteous. Grace came first. It wasn't that Noah obeyed, and that's why he was saved. It was that Noah received grace, and that's why he obeyed. The second truth is that the covenant God made with Noah benefited the members of his family. The righteousness of Noah was the foundation of the preservation of the rest of his family. In the story of Noah, we see a pattern for how God is going to offer ultimate salvation. Jesus is the one in whom God was truly pleased, the one God truly favored. Though all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, though none are righteous, not even one, God offers us salvation based on the sole person of Jesus and his righteousness. Remember, Noah's family was saved not on the basis of their righteousness, but on the basis of Noah's righteousness. They were saved because they belonged to Noah. Likewise, we're not saved by our own works, but by the work of Jesus alone, and we're saved only if we belong to him. However, where Noah could only save 7 members of his family, God has given to Jesus people from every tribe, tongue, and nation. The family of Jesus will be so much larger than the family of Noah. Just as Noah spent his life in faith building an ark while the world rejected his message, we should spend our lives faithfully telling people about the coming judgment and the good news of salvation that God has made possible for us through Jesus Christ. Just as Noah's story ends with the reaffirmation of God's covenant and a commissioning to follow God in obedience, so also our salvation is not an end in itself, but what precedes our own obedience. God has commissioned us not only to be fruitful and multiply, but also to take the good news of his merciful love to the rest of the world. The Bible tells us that God grieved before his judgment took place. What does that tell us about his character and how he views sin in our lives? Why is it important for us to recognize that God's grace must come before our obedience? And what lessons can we learn from Noah's example of his faithfulness? Noah is described in the New Testament as a preacher of righteousness. In what ways does our mission to call people to repentance and faith resemble Noah's example? In this lesson, it's helped us to begin to see how and why it is important for God's grace and love to coexist with his judgment and righteous anger. Both of these characteristics are necessary, and together they reveal something deep to us about God's character. Not only should our hearts be grieved over the fact that sin almost led justifiably to the entire destruction of the human race, but they should also be grieved over the fact that God, who judges sin, also grieves because of the sin's presence in our own hearts. This was true not only back then, but even now. God is still grieved at the sight of the rebelliousness within us. In a similar way that Noah was obedient to God, we too should follow in his footsteps. And as God commissioned Noah and his family, we too are commissioned with the task of preaching the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus. The flood didn't stop the sin-infected hearts of men from spreading. It was never meant to. Only the cross is capable of that type of healing, and that is the message we've been called to share.